Well, hello! Those of you that have watched my videos for a while will understand that I'm not a racer, and neither do I particularly describe myself as a freestyle flyer. I'm just kind of someone that meanders around the field and has fun with it. So imagine my surprise when I found myself going to an event ready to race. So what happened was that a group of guys that are based in Wales called Team Woolly Sheep decided to have an event to try and publicise what drones are about, how they're not scary for the public, and also having a race at a site they picked up. And when somebody asked me if I'd like a flying spot, I thought, yeah, I'd like to fly there and just, you know, fly around. I didn't actually know it was going to be a race. But then they released some stuff on Facebook with the heats and the names in there, and I found out I was racing, which is like, that might be interesting. But I thought, you know, this would be perhaps an interesting way of finding out what it's all about, because one of the really nice things here is they basically ranked everybody by their experience, and mine was not experienced at all. I've gone through a couple of gates. We did some sort of pretend racing about 4 years ago in which I tried going through some gates and crashed a lot, and that was about it really. So the fact you're placed with people at about your same ability and the pros are put in to sort of a higher rank thing meant it seemed a bit friendly, a bit easy to go along with. Sort of, we're all in this together, about the same, and that should be a good thing. So I thought I'd describe my time doing this, because I know if you guys out there who might be wanting to get racing, if you're like me, I'd feel pretty intimidated if I was going to a great big open race and you've got some of the big names competing, because you're going to get sort of, you know, blown away if you haven't been doing this stuff. So it can be quite hard to get that practice in unless you have a sort of base like this. So here's my experience on it, and I must talk first about the site. It's called Miskin Manor. It's not far outside of Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales for you guys that aren't familiar with geography, and it is an amazing place. It's a beautiful manor house set in what looks like acres and acres of grounds, and I was driving through there and just thinking, how on earth did these guys get this hotel to let them race around in what is effectively their backyard? Because normally when you're dealing with what essentially is a big posh hotel, is they're incredibly worried about liability and what's going to happen to people if they've got drones racing around at high speed. But as it turned out, after talking to the guys and, you know, asking what sort of blackmail did they have on this hotel, they said that the guy that owned it was actually a bit of an aviation nut. He used to come in on his own helicopter, and so was really interested in drones and was quite happy to let them race there. In fact, it had perked up sales in his coffee house within the back of the hotel, so he was super happy. I don't have anything specifically set up to race, so I thought what I'd do is take a quad that I knew flew nicely and saw how that would go. So I took this Holybro Coppice 1. I'd cut the GoPro mount off for it, and it was just as standard. The camera angle is not silly, but I thought, you know, rather than go with something that I knew would go really fast, I wanted something that I knew would control nicely, because at the end of the day you've got to get through the gates, not just blatter along in a really fast way in a straight line. So when I got there were a lot of tables set up for the pilots area, and I could sort of dump my stuff down and get my bits ready. We were asked to provide proof of insurance, which I got mine through FPV UK, and we were asked to show our failsafe. So without the props on, start the quad up, turn the radio off, and obviously the motor should stop spinning instantly, which we could do. We're all allocated a frequency ahead of time. I was on race 7 and I would be able to stay there all the time, and it's obviously really important when you're at this sort of thing that you can't switch on at a random moment and start messing around with your VTX and stuff, because you'll blow other people away that are in the sky. So I'd already set that. It had to be set to 25 milliwatts because there would be 6 people flying at a time, which is quite a feat just in itself, and all going around the track together. I've watched a whole bunch of race laps on YouTube, and the thing that I take away from it mostly is I can't tell what's going on. The route seems really complicated to the point of actually putting me off. Now it's kind of interesting because I showed a bit of footage on my Patreon feed just to say, hey, I was racing, here's one of my laps, and a comment I got back is, wow, that looks really complicated. I don't know how you sort of cope with that, and you know, kind of put people off. So I figured maybe it's because unless you are there doing it and actively sort of learning the course, perhaps it all looks that complicated. And it comes back to the fact that racing is much more fun to do than watch, because watching is quite hard work. Either you're far away and you're watching these angry bees go along, or even the feed, if you're not flying it, then the lines taken can be like a bit complicated, and it looks all a bit juddery and sort of less smooth than your normal sort of freestyle flying. But what we did in order to understand the course is first we walked it and understood what the gates meant. For example, a lot of guys were like, that's a split S gate, and I'm like, how do you know that's a split S gate? And because it had two flags going up. Oh, okay. So easily learned, and there were nice sort of the dotted things going in between the gates. So I just had to know where to do the split S. There was this gate which was sort of two sections, which you go through the bottom and then back up and through the other. And it all seemed okay when I looked at it. It seemed to sort of flow, and I was trying to memorise it. And then what happened is, so I was on heat 5, and what would happen is you had the guys all sit in the allocated seats for each race, and the guys that are in the next heat afterward would spot. So for the first few races I put my goggles on and I sort of walked myself through the course as the other guys were racing it, and then when it came time to spot, I was sort of thinking ahead about where he had to turn and do things, and basically be able to follow around the course but understand he was going to make the right turn to that. So by the time I actually got to sit down and do my race, I was fairly confident that I was starting to understand the course. I wanted to take it nice and slow just to see how it went. And so we all sort of lined up. There were these little stands that you put your quads on, and there's an automated countdown. Another really good thing that this race had, which others don't. I've seen other races where you have to have a transponder to do the timing system. This one worked on a kind of open source thing where it had this box with like 6 Arduinos in it, and how it would work is they'd look for the peak RSSI of a video signal. So when a quad flew through it, the peak signal would mean it's just gone through the gate, and that would do the timer system. I mean, I don't know how super accurate it is compared to a transponder, but it worked pretty well for this, and I was pretty impressed with how that actually went. Anyway, so my first big race, I was sort of, you know, psyched up, ready to go. I was off, I went through the first gate, and then someone took me out from behind and I crashed into the wet grass. The weather was a bit of a feature here. It literally, it was sunshine in England. I drove across the bridge over the River Severn, and it's like the sky turned to black. So we had rain on and off, and the ground was very wet. And I hadn't gone back and set this up with turtle mode, and to be honest, it wasn't really worth it. I saw people go down, and then I saw them trying to turn over, and you just see this plume of water come up as they're trying to turn over, and it wasn't really worth doing because it was long grass and it was very wet. But anyway, so the second race came along, and I took some advice from the guys saying there's a bit of a pinch point, so if everybody goes off together and all tries to squeeze into this gate, you could all come together there. So I waited until they all went, and then I took my time and I went around the course, and because I was saying, well, how many laps do we do? And it's done over a time period, so you have 2 minutes to try and get as many laps in as you can, and I managed 2 laps, and I was quite pleased just to basically get round without crashing. And despite the rain and stuff, I managed to take part in 10 races, which was something because I only had 8 batteries with me. But because, for example, that first one, the battery went for about 10 seconds, it was like, oh, I'll just use that one again. So, and that wasn't the only time I crashed out. There were plenty of other ones, and there was interesting things like there was a race that was pretty much in the rain where it's like my whole view was distorted with raindrops going on. There was another race when I literally hit the air gate, and I found the air gate's the hardest thing. The air gate is where it's a sort of a ring suspended in the air. So normally when you're going through gates, you've got the ground reference, which I'm very used to flying low to the ground, so that's not a problem. As soon as they lifted up and I had to fit between something, that made it a lot harder. That was my real Achilles heel. And in one race I literally hit everything over and over again, but somehow made it round to the end in a 2-minute time. Take a look at this, and this is all from one race, and somehow the quad stayed in the air and it only came away with a bit of a bent prop. But that wasn't. I also managed to completely knock out my battery and have it swinging around like a pendulum under the quad. My goodness, did I go slow after my spotter said your battery is waving around like a pendulum? Go slow, and I did, but we still got round. So I had some clean races as well, and was pretty happy with how it was going there. I have to say my speed wasn't that amazing. My big problem was, I think, the cornering, where I tend to lose or I'd go on too far, because when I was turning around to come back, my thrust would sort of end up going upwards instead of forwards. That's kind of a working on the camera angle and thing. That's something you'd sort of sort out over time. I wasn't going to start messing with it as I was going. So what I would say is I'm still not a racer, but that was a lot of fun. And if you're gonna do a race and have a go at it, this is the ideal sort of thing to do. And my hat's off to Team Woolly Sheep for putting on such an awesome event. And they attracted in members of the public as well. They had some screens going showing what was happening, so people could wander in. They'd had some really good press coverage, even on the BBC News site, so they had guys coming in. They could show them in the screens what was happening live. They could view out on the field and be able to see stuff. They were being given goggles to look at. The Woolies had enough people, so they had basically guys manning the sort of booths, as it were, meeting people and showing them what was happening and explaining how it was working. They had simulators set up. They had a 3D printing thing. Really, really well organised meet. And the best thing about it was that if you just wanted to dip your toe in, if you've never raced before, if you could barely fly a quad in a straight line, then there was still a category open for you. So it attracted some pro racers. Kelsey FPV was there, James Bowles, Leo Whetfield. They were doing sub 20-second laps, where I was being lucky if I could get a lap down in a minute. But they were in their one group, and as the sort of times went slower, we were in our group, and so it was always competitive. So now there's quite possibly a whole bunch of specialised racing drone groups that would do the same sort of thing and say, come to us and we'll invite beginners along, and if they want to dip their toes in and do it, then we can do that. I think the problem is perhaps people don't know about your event. Team Woolly Sheep, they went out there, they put on this big event, they got press coverage, they got a lot of people interested in drone racing, and obviously through their Facebook group they got a lot of people along to the day as well. So if you are this sort of group and this is the sort of thing you do, get yourself an event together and get more membership and get the public in to show you what you do. I think the Woolies put up just the perfect way of introducing people to racing, and introducing the public to drones and saying, look, we're not evil, this is what we do. I'm not converted to a racer. I like to do lots of different things, but I'd certainly be up for doing something similar again occasionally, and perhaps even getting slightly faster and not crashing as much sometimes. Check them out. The Woolies have a Facebook group, which I'll try and link to down below. And I hope this video has been interesting and useful for you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.